I started this project 5 years ago, and it's just brought together many important parts of my life. Photography, meeting people, connecting with people. I like to remind myself how am I here?
Hmm. What brought us together?
Yeah. How am I here?
Yeah.
You know, um, Travel, faith, as each person defines it. Listening. Honoring each person.
It's a very beautiful thing to give the world, an example of the ability to listen.
Yeah, funny, I can do it here easier than other parts of my life.
Right, interesting. Yeah.
I sit and I try to do it, it works. Um, Even production, right? Because I'm a marketing director,
Sure.
so even hiring Claire and doing this.
Or
and,
what electricity can I use?
Yeah.
And how does it transfer into the world? Yeah.
So, it seems to be all of my life put into one.
Really interesting.
So
Really.
I'm very grateful to meet you.
My
And,
pleasure.
Claire has told me great things about you.
I don't know what she's told you because she doesn't know me.
She's been having great meals at a restaurant you don't even own anymore.
Oh,
yeah.
She's got a good belief system.
Yeah, exactly. So, let's just start off with a question, very demographic almost. Like, even though you told me a minute ago, just literally give me the play-by-play of your life. Like, where have you been?
Okay.
You were born where? Just for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, I was brought up by my maternal grandmother and my mother, my mother was one of 6 children, and my maternal grandparents came from Sri Lanka. My grandmother was Eurasian, and my grandfather was from Jaffna. So I'm pretty involved in the Jaffna politics, the Holocaust in Sri Lanka right now. My mother met my father, who was Pakistani Muslim, when he was traveling through Malaysia, and her sisters left to liberate India from the British by marching to Burma. Of course, they could never win, but it started the revolution, even though partition delayed all that, and divided India forever. I was brought up in Malaysia, which is in Southeast Asia, and it was at a time when we had 11 kings, Muslims, very benevolent, very benign kings, and 11 small states. And we were Indians, and most Indians came as laborers or as public servants in the British system. So we were very colonized. So we had very good road systems and good education, and education was valued. My grandfather was a headmaster, my grandmother was a headmistress, my mother was a headmistress, my aunts they were either lawyers, doctors, or they were all valued study, mainly English oriented. And so we were highly colonized, and because my grandmother was Eurasian, that is of mixed heritage, the common language between my maternal grandparents was English. My grandfather died early, and so we were brought up by my grandmother. She had 6 children. I was the first grandchild and was nurtured by 5 other uncles and aunties, who all eventually had babies and left them with my grandmother to look after while they went overseas to pursue their studies. So England was very big in my family, and at the age of 16 I asked to come to Australia to study, and it was seen as sort of half serious because they didn't regard Australia as the place to go to study. I chose Melbourne and came here on my own, and at a time when my mother was very busy and took for granted that the plans I was making were right. And I knew nobody, and I had never traveled in public transport. I'd never had pocket money. I'd never washed clothes or cooked. But I was so projected by this idea of coming to study in this country, because they'd had the Olympics here, and I thought, oh, well, they're probably nice to blacks. And I knew very little, but people were very nurturing and loving in a very white Australia. But because the Aboriginal situation was very non-city centred, I actually had no idea about settlement in Australia or anything like that. I just went to Western schools and had a Western life that I found easy to integrate in. And the journey started for me making a life in another country, which put me in a situation of redefining who I was and mapping what I learned and what I brought, and what a hybrid of myself. That journey took me to university and took me to study social work and took me to working as a social worker in the corrective system with young offenders. And it was the undoing of me, because it made me take myself on a personal journey about my own life and my delayed adolescence and my own life. But it also gave me the independence to make a lot of different choices, like playing music and working as a waiter and owning a restaurant, and then joining the women's movement, and then learning about community and connection and redefining, and all through a very beautiful relationship after a marriage that was very kind to me, but was a stepping stone to independence for a girl like me. And then I was able to learn about all kinds of things, about being a woman, about being alive, about where I come from and where I want to go. So that's, now at 64, that's the privilege of the journey that I took to come to Australia.
So many places to go here.
Yes, that's why I think it's important to sort of summarize it quickly to see where you would like to take me.
Well, let's, as Julie Andrews says, let's start at the beginning.
Okay.
I won't make you sing Do-re-mi though.
Okay. Do-re-mi. I'm trying to get away from Do-re-mi. A lifetime pursuit.
Yeah. Amen. So I'd like to ask people, how do you even define spirituality in your life today? What is your experience
of spirituality?
Of the divine, of what is sacred?
Larger than life, larger than me, and larger than ideas, is a kind of connecting to a feeling about how and why and what we're doing, with very few answers, but some indications that there are things that I need to take note of, because they will make more synchronicity in my life and give me a sense of why I am going through what I'm going through. Once I realize that I'm not a victim, and that the brain is not the only function, but the mind is much more important, and it involves feeling and thought. Once I connected that there had to be feeling and thought, and once I realized that there are things that I don't understand, and that I don't want to be involved in feeling like I know it all, or in moralism, in moral issues. I would like to be much more compassionate. Once I realized that passion was easy, but compassion was much harder. Once I realized that talking is not as important as feeling, and it made me redefine some of my practice and my endeavors. Playing music took me into another realm that made me understand that there are feelings and emotions and connections that are beyond understanding sometimes. This country has the most amazing landscape and open skies, and very little personal history the Aboriginal culture is so old, and the European culture, while it might dominate, is not old enough for it to be self-righteous. Almost everyone is a refugee here, culturally or emotionally or spiritually, so that there's some space for rethinking. There's no tradition to weigh down on you. So if you build a structure around some understandings, it's very easy to reconstruct some of your thinking that you've inherited. So it has a sense of liberation in citizenship in this country. And the indigenous people have always been very benevolent towards us. So we've never had to battle for our existence here. And at the age of 40, I realized I still hadn't met an Aboriginal person had permission, and I realized that the only way to find out about those things is to acknowledge them in yourself. So when I turned 40, I realized two very significant things. One is that I had no connection with Aboriginal people, had an entree into a country without acknowledging the people who really owned it, and that I was brought up with the unspoken belief that men are to be entertained and pleased and served, and that women are good, but they have to be watched because they are your competitors. When I realized that everything was the very opposite. That I had to make an acknowledgement of this land and learn about it. But once I acknowledged that, it happened very quickly, without me having to construct it. I was working with Aboriginal women, and I began to see more Aboriginal people in the city than ever before. So it's about an awakening in yourself. And then with women's issues, I realized that if I didn't really open up to the friendships and acknowledge the significance of women in my life, I would never be able to celebrate my own. And I would never take that journey to be the best that I am and to give up the struggle to be something all the time. And I realized that men longed for real relationships, and they were really disadvantaged by flirtation and by these ideas about them pleasing them. And then I started to have real friendships, and I was able to embrace my relationship with David that liberated me, because it was a mutual endeavor to look at ourselves without analysis. I came out of social work and analysis, and it just teaches you to be very good at talking about feelings but rationalizing them. And I realized the difference between emotion and feeling. And it was a big journey of self-appraisal that involved lots of private time. And it was like having a systematic nervous breakdown. In other words, having open heart surgery on yourself, but with a companion who never interpreted, pushed, directed, analyzed, but was there, just there. And that helped me to be open to re-looking at all my life, all the faiths that I'd endeavored to examine, and all the faiths that I've come across just by being alive. Because I grew up in Malaysia, where Indians, Malays, Chinese, Muslim, Hindu, Christian, colonial Christianity, I had it all. They all were stories about great people and great thinking. And there was no choice to make when I was an adult. It was just all of it. And that is the beginning of the opportunity to be open to great wisdoms and not get caught up in the practice of religion. So while I went to church and went to Sunday school and went to temples and understood the pleasure of Indian gods, Hinduism, so much humor and so much humanity, naughty gods and good gods, fabulous goddesses, and it decreased the endeavor that Christianity gave me to have one relationship with God and to open up my relationship with the universe and the natural forces of the universe and the strength and the power of our minds through Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, which I always say is not frequent flyer Buddhism, where you don't go do good things to get somewhere and be among the elite. It's about just having the best shot at being responsible for your own happiness, but taking happiness and contentment seriously and being wary of too much passion, which the Western world really admires. And because I've learned to speak English from the English, I can sound very passionate about things. And it was very humbling for me to take note of passion in myself until I actually don't like the word anymore, because I think it's quite dangerous. The way I think modern marriage is quite dangerous for developing bad habits, because you can take it for granted that you are privy to certain practices that you overlook, and then you find out they're unkind in relationships. With passion, you can think because there's a power behind it, it's better. And Buddhism has been very humbling for me to take a step backwards and realize that not knowing is probably more powerful than knowing, and that not having answers for everything is actually quite a good thing, and that life is not easy for anyone, but you are never a victim. There's always a possibility for change and always a possibility for mastering the pull to allow imagination to prevent reality. You know, that delusion is all right, but it can't be taken too seriously. In the end, it is a delusion. If you believe that someone is against you, it is possible as an adult to actually examine this person or this act or this practice and make it and diffuse it so that you're not wasting your energy and your life in a pursuit with someone or some endeavor that doesn't seem to be making you happy or successful, or doesn't give you this this amazing experience of synchronicity. Just the pleasure of things just happening rather than having to work hard at everything to happen. And I actually believe that if I've struggled too much, I've got to stop and examine it. So I'm at a stage now where I have very few enemies, but there are people that I know I shouldn't spend time with or over, and there are pursuits. Doesn't mean I still don't keep doing it, because at 64 you can actually see, I can see, that there are things that I'm compelled by that I have to manage, that there's no well to empty, that there are continuous things that have conditioned me in my life that sometimes I cannot help popping up, but they get healthier and healthier because I can better at identifying and being more compassionate about the process or myself. So that journey has been by discovering that my belief is that it's all, everything has its own natural force, you know. I grew up in a middle-class family. I'm frightened of snakes and frogs. They're the most beautiful creatures when left alone. I now have live in a house where there are foxes in the garden, and I'm not scared of them, but I am very respectful that they survive having been introduced here, and they are the pariahs of the bush. I have a possum that lives in the lintel of my front door, and some people would say they're ancestors who are still hanging on to me, and I think it's okay. And I've watched the mother bring the baby and leave the nest so the baby can now live independently in the house that it built, because the mother knows that we are sympathetic to it. And that is beautiful, so gorgeous. And I go and whistle to him every morning. He looks at me and then he goes back to sleep. He knows I'm greeting him, but he's never going to be my close friend. He lives independently. They're little things that make me feel that I am beginning to understand about the natural universe and how privileged I am to be alive with a brain that can learn and change and grow. And so I feel very privileged that the journey has given me some power to find happiness. I'm very sad today that I read that in Switzerland they voted to have 4 minarets outlawed because it reminded them of the force of Islam. So the people of Switzerland outvoted it. So you can no longer have a minaret. It is just an example of such blindness and ignorance and fear and confusion and disruption of the natural forces of human beings. And, very few people would have clean toilets in the world if they didn't have black people cleaning them, mostly Muslims. But they also don't realize that the Muslims in centuries ago, by praying 4 times a day, were able to have individuals that watched the movement of the sun and could calculate the exact number of days in the year with the eye and observation. If they understood that, there's not enough marketing about Muslim religion. So they pit it against Christianity. It's madness. I mean, whenever I speak to an audience where there are imams there, because in the women's movement, we're slowly making friends with the Muslim women, because they have to be, they have to have permission to fraternize in terms of women's issues. I always say, remember that Muhammad said that God sits at the feet of mothers. And remember that Muhammad said in his time that unless you, if women have to go to China to study, let them go to China. If young girls have to go, let them go to China. That's very liberated. And he also said if you want to have 4 wives, which was necessary in some cultures for survival, you have to love them equally, which means a different set of rules. And very few cultures can accommodate that without people killing each other. Where do you hear about 4 wives killing each other? It's hard, you see an article about 4 Mormon women living happily with each other, with their husband. I don't want that situation, but those women have a mentality that allows them to actually have a happy life and not interfere with anybody else's. And there's not enough good marketing. We've marketed in Australia how to try and keep it clean, so we pick up bottles and we scold each other, but we haven't marketed the way of treating each other when we're very different. We romanticize, like Benetton can romanticize how beautiful a black person looks in a bright green jumper, but we haven't marketed really big issues. And once again, with climate change, we're arguing about whether it's true or not true, rather than the fact that maybe we've come to a situation where countries want to talk about cleaning up a bit, just being tidy for the next generation. We're stuck on the argument about whether we should or shouldn't. And so I feel very privileged to be living in a country today where I can still enjoy moments of feeling that I do believe that there is a universal natural law that we can all learn that will actually be a better way to get to live together better than by actually talking and having rules. And so Australia is a kind of outpost for me. And I'm worried that we have delayed facing a recession because these natural things happen, and we've had a government that's delayed it by a whole lot of rhetoric and a whole lot of packages. But we're sitting here and we don't realize how hard it is in Europe right now with a recession. My girlfriend went to Spain last month and she said they went to an area where there was hotels 6 months ago. This was a very safe area. But 28% of the young people unemployed. The streets were full of teenage prostitutes. That's how, hard it is if you're even a tourist in Spain today. So we live in a dreamland here. It's pretty nice life.
Let me ask you, when you think about this idea of a universal understanding, energy, wisdom, how do you call that force in your life? What words do you use to call the divine or the sacred or the universal energy today?
Embracing the idea that I'm a citizen of the world, and there are certain responsibilities citizens have. That's to family and loved ones, connectedness, a belief that there are forces that we need to understand or make way for, and not believe that we can impose them. That the collective is important, and connections and synchronicity is important, but we have to liberate ourselves from a whole lot of behavior patterns in ourselves that make us victims, dependent, not feeling, and it is ongoing. It's not about, going to school and learning it. It's about the living the journey. And it's about respect and manners, but they're not like I heard and thought respect was or manners were. Manners is just stopping to think for a minute and watching and thinking about how someone might be, or just observing, be more, I don't know, mindful. It's not moralistic terms, like there's no such thing as laziness, and that there are forces that can make people very deranged and what we call evil, but they come from acute dysfunction that is a madness. It's a madness from having been driven mad. People are driven mad. I see babies being driven mad. I listened to some women sitting around a table in my restaurant, and one said, oh, she's been really mean today. And she was talking about a baby that big. And when everyone had gone, I said to her, I'm 64 years old and you can tell me to get lost, but I have to tell you that that baby has no capacity to be mean to you whatsoever. And what's more, if you keep saying that to her, she will know that you think that about her. She is filled with a longing for you, and she has no other way to communicate except to let you know that she's in pain. And if you look at her, you'll see that she's got teary eyes, she's got a fever and a runny nose, and she's teething. And the nicest thing you can do is to hold her and vibrate your concern and love for her position. But she's just a woman trying to be everything and having no connection with family and no older woman to hold her baby. But she comes from a very affluent suburb, and she has a huge pram like a four-wheel drive, and she is not having much support. The laws at the moment in Melbourne at the moment, if you're a young mother, you get 2 visits to an infant welfare centre a year. Used to be weekly once, where another older woman helped you with this baby. Now this baby could be driven mad before it's even a young person, because the human beings are much more vulnerable when they're born than a lot of animals. And they teach so much in the beginning. And when I see fathers with their daughters and their sons and mothers who are clearly putting out because they come to terms with the fact, I always praise them, I always do, because I feel so much gratitude towards them that they are nurturing a citizen of the world who might be able to give rather than need all the time. We are so filled with need when there's some dysfunction, and I don't blame parents, they're struggling themselves with their own dysfunction. So clearly in my work as a restaurateur, I am looking all the time, observing the kind of madness that people have that is socially acceptable because it keeps the rules. But eventually, those tremendous mechanisms of control don't work when you grow older. So a lot of people end up very miserable when they're old, whereas it should be a time of bliss, You look at animals when they're old, they sleep, they purr all the time. My cat, when it was dying, was purring. And I was stroking it. When she had kittens, she jumped on David's lap and purred while they came out. She wanted to share that with us. They're awe-inspiring moments about the natural universe. And even that cat was out of its context, but it had retained something that gave it pleasure at the right time. So it wasn't demented. And so when it was having kittens, it was purring, telling us it was happening, scratched on our door to wake us up. The same way as, old age should be all age should be blissful, happy. And so I feel very happy that I've found some tools through faith to maintain a state of contentment.
So when you think back on your life so far, what's your earliest memory?
My grandmother.
Your earliest memory related to faith or having that connection?
Oh, my earliest memory is my grandmother, because she told stories. And she told a lot of stories about Jesus, who was just this man who loved friendships. So she told me about a famous person, but who was actually a visitor in our home. We talked to Jesus every night. Jesus, tender shepherd, love me, you know. God, can you tell God to bless? And we had turns, my cousins and I, we had turns to name all the people we wanted him to look after. He had friendship with Mary Magdalene. He had friendship with Mary and, you know, the two sisters. He went to parties and gave us more fish and more bread. He made wine. If somebody sadly died, he brought them alive. It was a story about a very compassionate and lovely man who was blonde with blue eyes, because a photograph in our house was blonde with blue eyes, which was a complete misconception. But it was about a very kind, nice man who actually had relationships with women, but actually didn't marry, and seemed to be nice. And it never sat straight with me that he was conceived the way he was, but I kind of didn't believe it anyway, because there was always a crisis that somebody was pregnant without having a husband. So, you know, I knew that could happen. So my earliest memories were my grandmother walking me or whatever. My mother was very sad when I was born because my father didn't ever come back to us. And so I think I wiped that out. And then when I remembered things, I remember her as always crying tears. So my earliest memories is my grandmother, because it was about a kind of, she was able to tell stories and be happy. So that's my earliest memory, and my earliest memory of believing in, you know, God and the universe was a Christian one.
So what happened after that in terms of your idea of faith or belief?
Well, they believed in prayer, and prayer then became a form of meditation, first silence and thinking, then a form of meditation. So prayer is really a form of meditation, except the Christians get mixed up and start making pleas rather than listening to what might come into their head in silence. This is what I think. But I also knew that calling out for help wasn't a bad thing, because you could identify the pain in your own spirit, and then you could start to care for it. And analysis, you know, fucked it all up by making you analyze it and use your brains according to a theory. So Buddhism and Eastern religions, where there was meditation, was an entree for me to examine myself with some kind of feeling rather than hysteria, hyperventilating or emoting. So that was very helpful.
And when did you come upon?
When David and I got together.
What
And
year was that?
That was nearly 40 years ago, nearly 35 years ago.
So you weren't raised Christian though?
I was raised a Christian.
Oh, you were? Okay.
My mother was a Methodist, American Methodist. My grandmother was a Plymouth Brethren, but she rejected the church. She did what was in the Bible. She went to the back of the church and dusted her feet 3 times and never went back. So the minister, being an all-forgiving, went to her house and gave her prayers because she wouldn't come back because they were berating a widow. And she was a very strong widow. And she believed that the church was not something she wanted to belong to. So she was a great influence on me in that she had the minister going to our house to pray with her because they were worried about her soul, but she was only worried about taking some. She was not going to go to a church where people were bullies. And they did bully. They bullied widows. You know, they made them have this straight life. They weren't allowed to talk to men and all. You know, they guarded your life moralistically in those days.
How old was your
grandma? She was in her 60s. And that was a big thing in our life, that my grandma had dusted her feet 3 times at the door of the church. And my aunts won't talk about it now because they like to rewrite history to make it all sweet. My father was a Muslim, and he asked his brother to come and get me and take me back to Pakistan to be brought up as an adopted child for his older sister, to make good his eldest Muslim child. But my mother wouldn't have it. But when I came to Australia, I didn't go to church in Australia, but I went to Christian school. I went to PLC, but I knew it all. Like I knew it by then. I know the Bible really well because the Old Testament was like reading a story about love and lust and lying with this person, lying with that person. When we're not allowed to go near boys, that was really, good reading. And then the New Testament was about 12 people telling, or so many people telling the same story with different episodes. So I knew all of that really well. So when I came to Australia, the church didn't interest me, but here was an opportunity to have, to experience thinking about being alive as a citizen and as a human being in English language, but with some real regard for spirituality. The spirit elevated in different people, and everybody being able to, with develop wisdom and spirituality. The Buddhists from Tibet were giving the best rhetoric on it. I don't practice Tibetan Buddhism because it's got a whole lot of politics I don't even want to go into, because it suits their culture, but it doesn't suit me.
So what was your experience? You were here in Australia.
I was here in Australia.
What experience did you have? Tell me about some event.
Reading about the things that the Dalai Lama was talking about, meeting the Dalai Lama as a gift, not as something I pursued. I found myself in Dharamsala, the guest of the ruler that had given safe refuge to the Tibetan people, and it's a very sad place, even though it's a very spiritual place, because there are all these lost Buddhist kids sitting on motorbikes trying to look like teddy boys, and their brothers monks, like divided families, and the Indians don't really like them, and they don't like the Indians. It's not great, but they're giving refuge. I arrived there, and my friends have arranged for a gift for me to go and see the Dalai Lama with David. Mr. and Mrs. Stun Mullet, as they say in Australia. Why us? But we're going. So we're sitting there, and there's some Irish delegation, and there's some business people, and there's us. And we think, well, we wait, we get through our custom, you go through the detectors, and you go in this room, and this tall head prefect in a monk's outfit says you have 10 minutes. We go in there, and we sit down, the Dalai Lama comes, and he climbs on this chair like a little boy, this big sofa, and he says, and why are you here? And we say, because we were gifted to be here, and we want you to know that you're an amazing citizen of the world. We read about you, and we care about you, and we're really sad that you're not in your country. And he starts to tell us stories, and he tells us about his family, and he tells us about things that he's doing, and we tell him a few things about what we think and where we've been, and that we're the guests, and he never stops talking, and the head prefect comes back and says, time to finish. He says, no, we are not finished. So we sit and talk to him, and then he says, let's have a photograph. And the head prefect comes and says, you cannot photograph in the house. You have to go in the garden. He says, no, we are photographing in the house. So we get photographed, and then this Irish delegation just comes in and walks between us. They're ushered in, and he's saying, write to me. And it was like visiting a little boy in boarding school. And I had Indian money. You've got to carry a bag to carry money. And I just broke that, and I said, you've got a big family to look after. Here's some money for it. And David goes, and here's my tape of my music. And he goes, write to me. Well, I never wrote. He doesn't need me. He doesn't need me to write to him. It was just a friendly thing. And we came out of there and we thought we were just gifted something amazing, because he is the connection. And I still wasn't conscious. I went to a shop, and I noticed a lot of animosity between middle-class Indians and the Tibetans. And I said to the rich in India can be really vile. This woman was pushing around in the shop, and she went out of the shop. I said, you're not very happy with Indian people who have a lot of money. And he didn't say anything. And I thought, oh, how wonderful of him, And then I said to him, I met the Dalai Lama yesterday, and he said, you are so lucky. I am Tibetan, and I have never met the Dalai Lama. I realized what a privilege it was, and how it was not something to share, that I had to process it. And it was not something I had to boast about to anyone. And I didn't mean to boast. I was sharing, celebrating something, and he was just filled with, how could you be so lucky? And it was a moment for me. But I now have processed it enough to let you know that it was a joyous gift. But sometimes when you're gifted things, you don't know how lucky you are. I am so privileged. My whole life has been like that. Coming to a country like this, sitting here, who am I? One of millions in the world. Why is my experience any more? But the women's movement taught me that everyone has a story, and if you are asked to tell that story, tell it, and maybe 1 second of one thing may mean something to someone. So I tell that story because the women's movement told me everyone has a story, and lots of women in this country who are feminists can celebrate that in this country they're not divided. They haven't been commercialized enough to be given rewards to separate themselves. So collaboration is quite good here in this country among the feminists, women who love women, and who are, many of them, mainly connected with men who love women to get on with their business. And that is a really important thing that's happening in Melbourne. Now, I can say that because I have convened a women's organization that has been truly collaborative. And tomorrow we launch a book called Gender Lens, where we have made it clear that if you're going to give away millions, you have to look through a gender lens to make sure that that's going to benefit women and children as well, because they're looking after the world at the moment, whether you like it or not. And while women contribute 60 to 80% of in agriculture, they own 1% of land. You know, there are statistics that we could sprout. The most important thing is that in America, the millions that go to philanthropy, only about 15% goes to women's projects. And in Australia, we've got to learn to be smarter than that, because we've got less money for a start and less people. So there are some really powerful things happening in Australia at the moment, because for a long time Australians have looked around and thought that they're not as good as everybody else. But they're beginning to see that when Australians go overseas, they're actually not encumbered by history and can actually relook at structure, deconstruct examine all given values, examine all practices. Now, the women's movement has been doing that for many years. Not just the Western women's movement, but all underground movements. And the women's movement has been underground, and then mainly displayed by sort of divisive and angry people. And it has given the women's movement a bad name. So people say, powerful women say things like, I care about the plight of women, but I don't like to say I'm a feminist. Like saying I don't like to say I'm a Christian, but I go to church, because Christianity is not, the teachings of Christ is not what Christianity is necessarily about. And the same that the Dalai Lama is not about Buddhism. The Dalai Lama is about a Tibetan way of thinking that takes a lot of good things from the teachings of Buddha that are quite applicable in living in a Western life. And I live in a Western life, but it has access to a belief in spirituality, that there are forces there that you can tap into, whether they're figments of your imagination or not. If they are good ones and they empower your life, you can incorporate them and you'll find that synchronicity. You can sit around talking about synchronicity, or you can just enjoy it as a private, empowering experience. That's a kind of godliness that I feel.
Tell me, what was the first time in your life you feel like you had to rely upon, or you chose to rely upon that God energy, that synchronicity?
I think when I started to realize that my intent is not evil, and that I'm not a bad person, and that I can start to take stock of some pathways that I've taken that have been better than others, and modify, not just my behavior, but modify my belief that I am as powerful as I allow myself to be, and as good or as bad as I allow myself to be. So it's a kind of a management. It's a management of self. And then a contentment and a sense of success that comes with it. And of course, the success gets redefined, has to be, if you're going to surrender to the belief that your intent should be managed and watched and re-examined, that you have to be watchful and mindful of yourself. And that's the best citizenship you can have. So if you're a mother, be a mother. If you're a restaurateur, be a good restaurateur, and see that there are many other forms of success and many other forms of capital. So there's social capital, there's spiritual capital. I had a restaurant called EQ because I was thinking of the emotional quotient in business, but there's also a spiritual quotient. But right now I'd say it's probably sexual rather than spiritual, because the pursuit is for sexual attainment. What people don't realize is that the spiritual pursuit is very sexually fulfilling. So there are still delusions that we are all driven by and affected by. And so I just say, be as mindful, as watchful as you can be. And the great forces will be revealed to you in terms of your own power and amazing power of other people. And they're just in front of you in your own backyard. You know that saying, I went overseas to find myself and found I wasn't there? Just the people in the room have as much to offer you as the people next door. And so I say that experience taught me that.
And what was the first event in your life where that became clear?
When I am not computer literate. That's why I didn't get your message properly. Because if I can't find it, I'd close it, right? And eventually I'll get it. When I realized that there was such a thing as when you turn the computer on, whether you knew it or not, you were in the computer. And I thought, wow, you don't have to have a publicist for people to know about you. So you better be careful about who you are, because you could believe some of this stuff. And that information was, I don't know when it was, but around the time that I became aware of communication being so much more complex than I ever thought, because of the computer, because of technology, because of humanity dealing with things that are faster and larger than they ever imagined. And I realized that, wow, you know, if you don't define what your own success is, you'll be driven mad or driven to betray yourself and others and look to yourself. But the moment came when I formed my friendship with David, and we decided we would be first good friends, and friendship was no ownership. We never married because we knew that the presumptions by society and friends, loved ones, and yourselves are too dangerous for people in great need. And it has allowed us freedoms in thinking and being that transcend what people think is possible. When David got sick, into our life came a woman who was the first model in his art classes, who's now 50 and a yoga teacher, and very kind of validated by her parents. It was something I don't know about. My parents were preoccupied with their own pain, you know. So I searched for validation in all kinds of weird and wonderful and ridiculous ways, whereas she's a very validated person, and she was visiting David a lot when he was very sick. He's not anything like the strength that he was, you know. But he was very powerful because he's so sick. He's really ill at the moment. And he has a vitality for life that transcends his illness, and he has lived longer than anyone ever expected. Elizabeth loves him that I could do nothing but invite her to join us to live here. And she lives with us, and the house is big enough for each of us to have a private time. And I am not in any way destabilized. In fact, my life is enhanced because there's two of us here, two women in this house, who can live a better life because we share. And when she cooks, I clean. When I cook, she cleans. And there's no discussion about that. And we have managed to live better lives. And yet if David wasn't here, I wouldn't be living with Elizabeth. It's not like we have bonded together. It has been so easy. And some of my friends were separated because of incidents in their relationships, realized they could have negotiated compassionately with the reality of their lives. And David and I have never had secrets, and we've never had to deceive each other, and we've had friendships that have challenged our relationship, but never threatened it. And every challenge, because of that understanding, has been met with a wealth of advantage. So I feel very privileged to have met another human being who has helped me to discover that the mind and the spirit are strong and powerful part of this universe. After all, when I watched the possum, I've always thought of them in trees, like it's sitting on a little ledge, right? It climbs up on the wall by going completely flat, with a baby on its back. And when the baby falls off, it flattens itself, comes down, the baby climbs on it and takes it up. And then several weeks later, when the baby fell down because it was playing, she just watched as it came up. I see, it's miraculous to me about the way in which they can transfer safety and danger and everything without words. And so I think what I've learned from all of this is that you can have relationships with people where you don't have to talk about it and it comes up, where you can think about them and they'll turn up, where you can have a sense of what is right and what is wrong that is sharper and brighter and easier. You can move away from pain before it's ugly. You can sustain recalling how lucky you are before you get too demoralized by envy or this monster that comes up and says, remember, you're not really that sure of yourself. They're all self-generating and self-perpetuating and self-advancing. And I know that you know that, because you wouldn't be able to travel the world and meet a lot of people and sustain it if you didn't have some belief that there is something happening there, because you surrender yourself, but you're also in charge of yourself. And that's what I think has been the gift of living in Australia.
Was there a time in your life where you were a victim and you were
Sure.
who you wanted to be?
Sure, there was. Oh well, when I was when I was discontented in my marriage, while it was safe and approved of and everything, and he was a kind person, I felt a discontent. I felt a lack of, and I felt trapped and victimized by the fact that my family thought he was such a lovely man, and he was, but he wasn't as lovely as they thought he was. But he was never cruel to me. He was just, very nice. But I felt. Then I began to understand my insecurities and my needs. I was old enough to know about them. And I didn't want to have a secret life, and I didn't want to have an indulgent life. And I felt that the pursuit of relationships with men was time-consuming and tiring. And all the having affairs and having relationships, and it was just tiring and boring, and it was repetitive. The pattern was repetitive. I didn't like it, and I needed a challenge in relationship. And David Tolley challenged me. When I met him at a party, you know how you get attracted to someone and then you start telling snippets of your family and your life. And I was telling him about mine. I gave him a potted history, as if you can. And he said, oh, look, so I'm sorry about this, but it sounds like a lot of bullshit to me. I reckon you should tell that story again sometime. And our relationship was based on retelling the story and re-examining it for ourselves without direction and without malice and then I realized that I was so needy. And so I spent a lot of time talking to my parents in the privacy of a room about how I really felt and what I wanted from them. and crying buckets of tears for myself. And David did the same because he was very distressed about having 2 children with a woman who he could not be happy with. And he took it very, very seriously. So together we went on a journey of reliving and retelling to ourselves with a trusted friend. Of course, we grew closer than any marriage promise could bring. And we were able to reshape. You can't forever blame your parents, and you can't forever blame fate, and you can't blame... When I met my father, I said, how is it you've waited till I'm 18 years old to come to look for me? Do you think so little of yourself? What a brat. Nobody helped me. I was on my own, right? And he said, providence. I didn't know what the hell he meant. But I'm hell-bent on not believing in providence. I'm hell-bent on not believing I'm a victim. And I'm hell-bent on believing that at every opportunity there is a possibility for human beings to grapple with the urge to blame someone else and to be more compassionate. I mean, the Buddhist challenge for compassion is treat the person you think is your enemy or your threat as someone as you would treat someone you love and aspire to be loved by. Wow. That's hard, but if it makes you modify your behavior in a way that makes it much more tolerable to release that person from that entanglement with you. And in the same way as, examine all practices. Delusion looms everywhere, including about this man. I mean, I'd probably be more sympathetic if God was a woman. But the image given to me was probably a white man. And Jesus, his disciple, was a white man with blue eyes. And Buddha was an Indian, but I always see a very, very fat Mongolian man. So, I'd rather think that my mind was the delusion rather than that I have no faith.
Tell me about a time in your life where you doubted.
When I was in the middle of grappling between embracing a story of survival and embracing a story of unexamined life. And it was very confusing. Giving up the story that my mother and father met during the war. She was a beautiful girl. He was a handsome officer. They fell in love. The war ended. He was a prisoner of war because he was fighting for Indian independence. He was taken back to Pakistan. He had to marry the girl he was meant to marry. My mother waited for him. It was all so airbrushed and palatable. So it was an interesting story about love lost, but it didn't examine anything about the fact that I never asked, where's my father? And when I mentioned my father was mentioned, a tear came down. And then when I got that story, there was a choice to be a victim. And it was a miserable time because I had nothing to turn to. No God could help me, and no amount of prayer was going to change it. And it was a long journey back to living with who I was and modifying my belief systems so that they weren't just all pushed away in the back of my mind. You forget because you have to survive. I don't blame people who don't know. But if they could be given the opportunity to reconstruct and take hold of those, not always is it good to just get glasses. Sometimes it's good to test your eyes so your muscles can change, because people have seen better when they've tested their muscles and they haven't got lazy but wearing lenses all the time. And I think the brain is the same, and I like to keep my brain active. Having a 30-year-old business partner, sometimes he calls me Bumbleina, because I bumble. Because I'm old and I do bumble, forget things and stuff. I came from the 60s where, we thought mind expansion was the way for nirvana. Well, it wasn't. It got you more muddled than ever. When I listened to music I played when I was stoned, I realized it was the worst thing I could do to my music. What more in relationships and conversations? So mind expansion didn't help, therapy didn't help, believing in the fact that I have the power to manage myself instead of picking that bag of pain that I carry and thumping it down in the middle of every relationship and in the middle of every conversation, in the middle of every issue, in the middle of everything that I was confronted by, but managing it in a way that was tempered by the understanding that compassion might be a good idea, good way to calm yourself down from the passion of your opinion and the passion of your drive to see justice and to see that it does take two to tango, and that you can stop dancing or you can change the steps, and if that person doesn't like it, well, they'll give you up very quickly. And it doesn't have to be a ritual, you can make up the steps. When I realized that that was a possibility, I realized there was the possibility for some freedom, some personal freedom. And and so that was the gift that I got.
What are you most grateful for?
The opportunity of having been able to be given the chance by my mother to come to Australia and find myself. And that was never her intent, neither was it mine. My intent was to get away because she'd married someone years younger than her and was preoccupied with her survival. And she also knew that we had to go overseas to study. This was done, like wearing long pants if you're a man, you know. And I'm grateful for the fact that I came to a country that was in so much transition because it was so young and yet so old, that it had opportunity for me to learn and to expand because, as I said, it is unencumbered by tradition. It has history that it encumbers it, but not too much time for tradition to set in. And that is truly liberating, I think.
What's your greatest wish?
That there will be an opportunity for people to, that I'm thinking that maybe an Australian might be a person who has a message that is less of a doctrine and more of a, not a money-making venture, but I think that probably the mentality that comes out of being in a country that's unencumbered by tradition means that there may be some free thinking and there may be some philosophers, writers, and leaders who can actually capture the imagination of people who would like to manage their own being alive, the vitality of being alive, to come alive. And I think that we've got to give up doctrines that make people feel they're going to be privileged. You know, like they're going to be joining the company of something that's going to save them, and more the company of them being alive enough to embrace people, but with some good habits, some really good habits of kindness and consideration and mutual commitment and some mutual responsibility. And it sounds really rigorous, but I don't mean it in a rigorous way. I mean, it's really easy to find a lens through which you see life that is more empowering, more enhancing, and more satisfying. And I think that I've been lucky that I've been able to use all the faiths that I've been involved with, and that is Hinduism, Buddhism, and Christianity. They have given me things that I have been free enough because of Tibetan Buddhism writings and teachings to embrace. I embrace all goddesses, all gods, all religions, but the best of it. You know, I mean, in many ways, you have to be an alchemist for your own spirituality. And I think I've been given that opportunity in this country, and by the privilege of my grandmother telling me stories about a real Jesus, and there are many of them. And I meet them all the time, people who are kind and compassionate and speak out and are brave, and I hope that they never ever have to reach the point of having to be put on a cross. I don't want that for anyone, not even Jesus. And yeah, but I feel as privileged and as rich and as lucky as ever now. And I really look forward to feeling even better next year and the year after. And I don't mind that I can see the light at the end of the tunnel because I'm 64, but I want a lot more. I'm enjoying being alive. I feel very, very happy about that.
Do you have a message?
No, I just think everyone has an opportunity or should find someone to accompany them on a journey of finding their own contentment and some pleasure. Yeah, some pleasure. I have a high standard of pleasure, and I usually have a high standard of leisure, but right now I have a very young restaurant, and so it's like having a baby. It's very consuming. And my friends, my women friends, my companions are very, very loving. They bring me lots of chicken soup and shut the fuck up, which is what you do when someone is having a hard time. And it makes you stronger to rally around, because when your turn comes, you know how to take it, and you feel you've got a right to take it. So it's that kind of balance. But I wish everyone happiness, really. They deserve it. And those who are not happy, I wish them that someone in their journey will help them a bit, even if it gives them happiness for a little while. I do, really. It's worth being happy. It's so blissful.
How does being a restaurateur connect to your journey?
Okay. I am looking after people in happier circumstances than I did as a social worker. And I always thought social work was a bit like modern missionary work, except it's more challenging in that you don't have to change their lives. You just have to find people a better way to manage their lives. I find in a restaurant it's very enjoyable to please people so easily. I like being in a situation of providing within certain rules so that I don't get embroiled. So given that I like being in service, I find in this country, I'll give you an example. If you're a waiter in Asia, and I call myself a waiter, businesswoman and musician, they're all important things to me. If you're a waiter in Europe, you're generally very busy being very hip, but you very rarely eat in the restaurant where you work. I mean, go there and pay to eat there. If you're a waiter in Asia, you very rarely feel worthy of it. If you're in Australia, it's a very good contract. You work somewhere for 4 hours or 5 hours, and then you get changed, you sit down, and your boss waits on you. I like that, and I work for that sort of feeling of independence and honor. And being in service of people then becomes very liberating, because they're there. Don't worry about who they are, what they are. Just give them a good time by honoring the contract to be there for them and to stand behind food that you don't feel ashamed of and to serve them and watch them. Everybody is very vulnerable when they're eating. Remember that if you can make them relax without words and leave them alone and make them feel good and feed them good food, you're blessed being able to make people happy. They thank you at the door. They're pleased. It's easy. I like it. But it's not easy to have businesses. And that's the big challenge in being a restaurateur. Giving enough to also be honorable in the way you pay people. And it's very prohibitive. I was the president of the Restaurant and Catering Association for 13 years. And I can tell you that it is harder and harder to have a restaurant if you don't have a lot of money behind you. And it's making me rethink about being in the industry. It's also become a fashion accessory, a restaurant, where clothes talk to each other rather than people. And I am really soul-searching all of that now. Doesn't matter. It's okay. I can leave it. But I am now looking at all those things, and it's interesting because it's sociological. It's looking at social patterns and change. We didn't have an agrarian culture in Australia, so magazines influenced restaurants. And restaurants influence family culture. But now everybody wants to be a chef. It's a fashion thing now. And I'm very disillusioned by that. I'm not enamored by it at all. I don't like its being so popular. It's just an eating place. It's an eating house, you know. The word restaurant was connected to a time in England when there was a lot of people who were unwell, you know, with plagues and stuff. And restaurant was the name of a broth that was made with many meats. It was a soup. And so restaurateurs were people who gave restorative broth to people. I always have a chicken soup or a soup on my menu. Yeah. So the word restaurant was to do with restorative work, and I still like it. You know, you can touch people and you don't need to go further. You know, for a woman, an Eastern woman, it's really nice to please people without having to get into them. And it's taught me in my relationships with men and women. What were you going to say?
Do you pray?
No, but I do. I do look at the heavens, and I do look at my goddesses, and I do look at pictures and think if there are forces that come through people, may there be people who protect me when I need. Yes, because I have a lifetime of praying. My grandmother prayed with me when I was a baby, but I don't kneel down. I'm just walking around. I've got a few goddesses here, there, and everywhere, and I just like that tanka. It's just saying there's a force of spirits that can exist, because I don't know. I just know that I want to leave here tidy, leave this earth tidy. You know, resolved. That's what I mean by tidy, resolved. And yeah, I feel that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. May your journey continue well, and I hope that you will have the opportunity to reconnect with all of us in some way, that we can see what you have come to. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wish you really good health and happiness. Clearly you're doing something you want to do. That's happiness. And you're clever to have made it so that you earn a living as well. So you can make this as indulgent as you want. It's great. It always is. Music has cost us a fortune. Painting costs a fortune. But we have always worked. David was an art lecturer for many years, and I've always had restaurants. And I work when I play, and I play when I work. And you do the same.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. You all right?
Yeah.
One of the things I forgot is that this is actually a video. So I don't know what I've said that I will regret, but it doesn't matter.
Well,
No regrets.
yeah.
No, what I'm saying is,
Mm.
and I wish you well in your editing. That's another thing again.
Yeah,
It's like
inshallah.
that's like sculpting.
Yeah, that's the part that eludes me.
Not when you do it, it just come because you know what you want.
Yeah.
But that's amazing work, that one, isn't it? Well, you know that as a photographer. You cull, don't you?
Well, the photography is easy.
Yeah.
You know, I can pick pretty quickly the images that speak the greatest to me.
But you find that because you're asking people to talk about faith, they're talking about other things too. That may lead to faith, but lead to other things too.
No, that's all. You know, that's all.
So yeah.
Everything is. I had a very interesting experience last year. I was in Mumbai, and the Western conception of God is very external and personal. Jesus, Muhammad, so when I went to India, even though there was Hinduism and all the different gods, people spoke in a very internal
Very
and
internal.
non-personal way. So so my conclusion was, though, it's all true.
It's all true.
It's all God.
Yeah, it's all good.
There's nothing separate.
No.
There's nothing separate.
I mean, my grandmother was a Christian, but she'd walk past and the tap's dripping. She says, God's crying. So you turn the tap off and you think, that's when you grow up, you realize that's the purpose. That, I heard a woman say today, don't be naughty, Santa Claus is watching. I thought, oh my God, he's become the next God for Christmas. He's the God. She's threatening him with Santa Claus. But my grandma would say, God's crying. God's crying. Turn the tap off. But the Hindu religion taught me about the way they're so compassionate, because they even identify their gods as having foibles and having weaknesses. I used to love Shiva because he smoked dope and he had rasta hair and he was a naughty boy. How boring, until I found the goddesses fabulous too. But
or even Krishna, right, was the butter thief.
I know, so gorgeous stories. Yeah. But the thing that's great about, the thing they said about Shiva was that when he wasn't invited to some party where his wife, that was, her father gave it, and her sisters all brought their husbands, but he wasn't invited because he was a bad man. And when she jumped into the fire and all different parts of her body were cut up and distributed all over India so that he wouldn't find her, he was so angry that it caused earthquakes and floods and everything. So they gave him ganja. That's the story you get told. So that stopped all the earthquakes and everything. So when I found out, when I was about 17, that he smoked ganja as well, I thought it was so wonderful. Good story, isn't it? Anyway, I find myself in India with a mother, a daughter and a granddaughter, my friends, and they take me to this place where this stone looks like a huge vagina, and it's run by men, and you take a sari as a gift and everyone goes and kisses it. All women go. And they're selling purple ties. That's women's colours. Yeah. So I brought back one for everybody in the trust. I said, I had to kiss a stone for this. Big vagina. And once a year it has red water coming out of it. They dye it, of course. And that's thousands of women, all of us there. I'm thinking, wow. This country is just amazing. The belief systems that you can find everywhere.
It's beautiful. And it's...
I go as often as I can to India to restore myself, my Indianness, because you become a stereotypical Indian person when you're away from India. When you go to India, there's thousands of Dur-es. It's very good for you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When you live outside of your birth culture, you have to go back and take stock. It's not words and ideas, it's just being there. Anyway, lovely to meet you, and thank you for the experience as well, because you obviously had a say in who came. And can I give you anything to drink, some water? Or?
I'll just have